President Trump making a rare visit to the Federal Reserve, generating a few awkward moments with Chairman Jay Powell. The president said ahead of time that he was visiting to check out the central bank's ongoing renovation project. President Trump has also been publicly pressuring the Fed to cut interest rates. Trump appeared at the site in a hard hat next to Powell. There was a moment of awkwardness as the two men went back and forth about the cost of that construction.
You're including the Martin renovation. You just added
our entire capital plan.
Yeah, you just added in a third building is what that is. That's a third building.
Well, no, but it's a building that's being built.
No, it was built 5 years ago. We finished Martin 5 years ago.
It's part of the overall work.
But it's not new.
All right, joining us right now is CNBC senior economics reporter Steve Liesman and our senior Washington correspondent Eamon Javers. Eamon, why don't you talk about this from the president's perspective, and then we'll have Steve talk about what this meant from the Fed's perspective, too.
Yeah, look, Becky, my takeaway yesterday was that, this was a dramatic moment, right? We've really never seen anything like this in terms of a live confrontation on national TV between the president of the United States and the Federal Reserve Chair. So inherently, there was drama here. This was definitely a flex by the president to call out Jay Powell. He sees this construction project as sort of waste, fraud, and abuse with money that should be going ultimately to taxpayers. And so, it was a dramatic moment. But the nuance, I thought, was important, which is that Trump backed off some of his, hurling of insults at Jay Powell. He said, I don't want to get personal when standing next to him. He also backed off of his calls for Powell to resign and didn't say he wanted Powell to be fired, even though reporters at the site asked him several times. So I think this was actually, as much as it was a flex, it was actually the president backing off a little bit of his calls for Jay Powell to step down, step aside for the moment. The defiance annoys Trump. And I think this will continue to annoy him as Jay Powell continues to defy him. But for the moment, this was actually, I think, a de-escalation.
That was kind of my read on it, too. Steve, it did make for some awkward moments on television.
Yeah, that was not something I think the Fed was seeking, I'm pretty sure. I think they didn't know if the president wanted Jay Powell there even up to like hours before this thing happened. My understanding is they kind of learned about it from the president's office that he was going there. So this was not something they orchestrated. But Becky, I think the important thing is agreeing with Eamon is that I hear a huge sigh of relief coming out of the Fed that this ended up the way it did with that one incident there, notwithstanding that not being, they don't see that as a big deal. I think they're happy that the president is saying this is not a firing offense, that everything was sort of more or less gracious. He wants to see the building completed. And now we'll just go back to arguing about interest rates. But, that's a problem that could be resolved before long. We have a meeting next week. I don't expect the Fed to raise rates, but it could change the language to indicate to the country and the president that rate cuts are coming if indeed inflation remains under control, which I think is the important thing.
Hey, let's talk about the market's reaction yesterday, too, Steve. We did see the two-year yield push a little higher, just on the idea that this was not a fireable offense and that Powell's not going anywhere anytime soon.
Yeah, a little unclear to me how related the bond market movements were to what was happening there. When I look at my feed this morning and the economists and the strategists and the traders that I read when I wake up, I don't see a lot of focus on this as having been a market mover. I guess maybe the tension is down a little bit. So I don't believe that the market thought that the president's pressure was going to lead to a rate cut. You could actually argue the opposite, that the more the president pushed, in fact, there's an article in the Wall Street Journal about that this morning, that the more the president pushed, the less likely the Fed was to cut. I don't think that was true, but I think that was perhaps a market perception there. So I think the market is back to figuring out the interesting question, which is really an important one, which is how dovish can a new Fed chair ultimately be? And I don't see, when I look at the forward curve of rates, Becky, this idea that the new Fed chair comes in with guns blazing to cut rates, to mix a couple metaphors there.
Eamon, do you think if Steve is right and the language is altered to kind of open the door to the possibility of cuts, that would be enough to calm this president?
No. I mean, I think the president wants what he wants and is not going to settle for half measures or anything, that appears that way. But look, I mean, I think both sides got what they wanted yesterday at the end of the day. As tense as this was and as awkward as it was for the Fed, they got to have Jay Powell standing next to the president, publicly disagreeing with him, which very few people do, and demonstrating physically his independence from Trump. And at the same time, they avoided having Trump go sort of full Zelensky on him. So they were able to sort of get the best of both worlds. The president was able to get his flex, right? I mean, the president likes to dominate and domineer people, and he was able to do that, right? He sort of dragged Jay Powell out of his office and forced him to tour around the site and explain the cost overruns and got what he wanted. The president and his staff both are raising the idea of lowering interest rates and the cost overruns at the same time, at the same place, but insisting that they're not linked. I asked the president's OMB director yesterday whether or not the president will back off of his criticism of these construction overruns if Jay Powell lowers interest rates, and he wouldn't say that those two things are connected, and yet they continue to raise them at the same time in the same place. So the president's going to hold this over Powell's head.